Despite having the lead at halftime, the Seahawks 2023 hype train went off the rails in the second half of a 30-13 loss to the Rams. I'll be breaking it all down on our latest post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s, as always, whether you're listening nearby here in Bellevue, Washington, or over on the other side of the country in St. Petersburg, Florida. We greatly appreciate you listening to Locked On Seahawks 5 days a week. Man, that was an ugly showing. One of the worst halves of football I've seen the Seahawks play. They were ahead 13-6 in their season opener, 13-7 actually against the Rams, and ended up folding on offense, defense, and special teams in the second half. 23 unanswered points. Unfortunately, have to dive into everything that went down at Lumen Field in this really disappointing first game of the season. We'll have 3 up, 3 down as well, and our weekly game balls on offense, defense, and special teams. Without further ado, let's get to our lead story here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. Seattle, for a half, looked like they were in command against the Los Angeles Rams in Sunday's opener at Lumen Field. 13-7 lead. They scored on 3 of their 4 possessions. They had a field goal attempt on the 4th one after a blocked field goal by Jared Reed. That those 3 points ended up not being a huge deal because Seattle fell apart in the second half, but they did have the 6-point lead going into the second half. The offense was at least moving the ball deep into Rams territory. They got a touchdown from Geno Smith to DK Metcalf. The defense, after giving up a touchdown the first drive, no more points the rest of the half. So there were a lot of positives, and unfortunately that's where the positives stopped for the Seahawks in a game that ended up being an absolute blowout in the second half. The Rams controlling the line of scrimmage both on offense and defense. Seattle had 12 total yards of offense in the final 2 quarters. That is not a typo. That is one of the few times that Seahawks fans don't want to see the number 12. 12 total yards. Geno Smith with 9 yards passing in the second half. And I'm going to give him a little bit of a mulligan here. I know some 12s are not going to agree with that necessarily, but Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas going down with injuries in the second half. I mean, Pete Carroll was trying to say that Abe Lucas, it was just his knee flaring up and it really isn't an injury, but he wasn't able to play. So that is an injury to me. Charles Cross dealing with a toe issue. It sounds positive that he could be back fairly quickly. We don't know the extent of the sprained big toe. Nothing came back on his x-ray during the game either, so that's good news, but he could miss some time, and that was definitely not good news when you consider how this offense played in the second half. Geno Smith didn't have time to throw. I think he was averaging about 0.3 seconds per snap in the second half when he dropped back to pass. The Rams were coming after him with a siege, and Jay Curhan, particularly on the right side, was not able to protect Geno Smith at all. They couldn't get any run game going after halftime. They ran the ball well in the first half, but when you're not getting first downs, they were 0 for 4 on third down of the second half. Couldn't sustain any of their drives. When you have that issue, you can't establish any run game. And they just didn't have enough plays to get Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet involved after halftime. So it was a complete disaster on the offensive side of the football for the Seahawks. And yet, that's probably not the biggest storyline for me coming out of this game. On defense, the third down issues were a major problem. If you want a silver lining, run defense-wise, they gave up 2.3 yards per carry. The Rams were not able to consistently run the football, but it didn't matter because Matthew Stafford could do whatever he wanted from the pocket, tons of time, comfortable. And this was PFF's reporting today, 5% of the dropbacks the Seahawks were able to generate a pressure, just 5%. So Matthew Stafford had tons of time in the pocket, really comfortable. His arm looked healthy after missing 8 games last season. He was slinging the ball all over the place. And Seattle gave up first downs on 9 of their first 12 third down opportunities to get a stop. They just couldn't get off the field. And the 1 or 2 times that they were able to do it, Trey Brown got a defensive hands to the face penalty that extended the drive. And then they had another set of plays where they had a penalty that ended up extending the drive as well. So even when they were getting stops, they still were on the field. It was an ugly display for the defense. And as Bobby Wagner talked about afterwards, like, this is unacceptable, allowing that kind of a percentage of plays on a third down to be converted. There was a couple 3rd and 10s or longer that the Rams converted. They went 5 for 5 on their opening touchdown drive on 3rd down. There was a 10-yard play on 3rd and 10 to Van Jefferson, a couple of hookups with Tyler Higbee. There was a 3rd and 4 run play that it looked like Joseph had parted the seas. I mean, the run defense was good most of the game, but there were a few examples where the defense was not able to get the job done, and there was a win by the Rams up front. And I think the most disappointing part of all of this was the lack of pass rush. The Seahawks just could not take advantage of the fact that this Rams offensive line had 2 guards that had 5 combined snaps under their belt in regular season the NFL. They were busting out a new left tackle as well, and Allard Jackson. This is an offensive line that the Seahawks should have been able to generate consistent pressure, and yet they were not able to do it. They could not get to Matthew Stafford at all in this football game. Just 2 quarterback hits on 38 dropbacks. That is unacceptable. So there's a lot of different things that were miscues, a lot of different issues for the Seahawks on the defensive side of the football. They gave up several 30-plus yard pass plays. They were getting chewed up in the middle of the field. The run defense was good with a few hiccups in there, but really it was a very disappointing defensive performance, especially considering they gave up just 7 points in the first half to go out and give up 23 unanswered. The offense certainly didn't help. They kept putting the defense in a bad spot, but when you can't get off the field, it creates major issues. And so the Seahawks were not able to help out their offense. The defense gave up a couple touchdown drives that were 14 or more plays as well. So that created a lot of issues. For those of you watching, I am in the stadium, so I apologize for the chrome dome that is blasting off of my head with the sun shining through. But nonetheless, that's maybe the only bright thing that has happened all day here at Lumen Field if you are a Seahawks fan. But it was really a struggle on both sides of the ball. When you get only 12 yards of offense, I know you're playing 2 backup tackles, but it just seemed like the playbook completely got condensed at that point. They couldn't pass the ball because Geno Smith didn't have time. And they had a 2nd and 2 that was set up by short completion, and DK Metcalf gets a taunting penalty against him. Now it's 2nd and 17. You can't run any of the plays that you have in your playbook to get that kind of yardage because Geno Smith isn't going to have the time. So Smith, after the game, was saying, hey, you can put it all on me. I'm not putting it on him. The backup tackles, it was a position where the Seahawks just couldn't run their offense. They could not function without Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. So if one or both those players is out next week in Detroit, that is a major issue. They're going to have the whole week to game plan, but you're going to have to figure out what kind of offense can we run if we're not able to protect Geno Smith. And that was a huge problem throughout the second half of this game. Without sustained drives, you couldn't lean on the run game either. So it was just one of the ugliest halves of football that I've covered as a beat reporter here in Seattle. I can't remember 2 quarters where the offense was that bad and the defense gave up that many 3rd downs, could not get off the field. The special teams was okay today, but there were some penalties. So really, it was just a rough outing for the Seahawks all the way around. And I'm going to be diving into more specifics coming up as we get into the game balls. There were a few players that had solid outings for the Seahawks, particularly in the first half of this game, but a little tougher to pick out standouts that had good games. I'll be looking at offense, defense, special teams, dishing out those game balls. And later on the show, we'll have 3 up, 3 down, my 3 winners. Again, that's going to be tough to pick out of today's game, and 3 players that really struggled and contributed to this disappointing 30-13 loss to the Rams. We will get to that coming up next here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. When I was a site manager, LinkedIn Jobs was my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates, and they made the process easy and seamless. All you have to do is create your job post and then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires. against leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You're listening to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s out there, even after a difficult season opener. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. A really challenging opener for the Seahawks. A tale of two games, really. The first half, Seattle, it seemed like they were in control. The offense scored 3 of its 4 possessions. They did stall in the red zone on their opening drive. That's something they're going to have to clean up. The situational football in general was really ugly for the Seahawks on both sides of the ball, but they were up 6 points, and it felt like the Seahawks were right where they needed to be. And yet, out of halftime, I don't know if they took a nap during halftime or whatever went on, but they just did not look like the same team. And the injuries to the offensive line, Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas, didn't help either. Let's get to our game balls. There still were some players that had really solid football games. And starting on offense, this is a player that didn't get the ball very much. In fact, I think he had just 1 carry in the second half because Seattle went 0 for 4 on third downs. They fell further behind. They had to throw the ball, and they couldn't get any yardage in those situations with Geno Smith under constant duress. But I've got to give this game ball to Ken Walker III, who I thought had a really solid first half. And first drive of the game, the Rams shut him down at a couple run attempts. But after that point, he had a stretch in the second quarter where he had 38 rushing yards on just 4 carries. And he really was a catalyst for the Seahawks being able to get the DK Metcalf touchdown and then a field goal on the next drive. He set those up just as much as Geno Smith, who completed 75% of his passes in the first 3 drives of this game. So Geno Smith was wheeling and dealing. He was throwing the ball well. He was getting the ball out on time. He had time to throw, something that he didn't have in the second half. But Ken Walker III was the one guy that I felt like, even though he didn't get to do anything really in the second half, that wasn't his fault. That's just the way that the game ended up going. But 12 carries, 63 yards, had a couple of explosive runs, had a couple of really nice plays where he was able to lower his shoulder and lower the boom down on defenders. So I thought, compared to the rest of his teammates, it was a very up and down game, especially all the way down to the second half. Ken Walker III did not contribute to that because they couldn't get the football in his hands, but he had a really solid game. If the offense could have sustained some drives, I think he had a real chance to get to 100 rushing yards in this game. Unfortunately, you get just 1 carry in the second half. Unless you explode on that one, unlikely to be able to hit that yardage total. So he was a non-factor, unfortunately, in the second half. But that's about as bright of a spot as it was on offense, considering they had 12 yards in the entire second half, and they didn't get a chance to really establish him. Zach Charbonnet didn't get any carry. He only had 2 carries the whole game, 17 carries the whole game for the Seahawks. That is not the way that Pete Carroll wants to run the offense, but that's just the way that it went. Luckily, Ken Walker did have some really nice runs in that first half to help set up those 3 scoring drives, and the Seahawks had the lead. In that sense, things were working out exactly how they wanted it to, even if they were not finishing drives. I thought he looked really good after missing a lot of training camp with a groin injury. It's just unfortunate they were not able to get him involved more in the second half when things started to unravel and the game got away from them. As for the defensive side of the football, I mentioned it earlier that the Seahawks did not have much success getting after Matthew Stafford in this game, but there was one player off the edge in particular that jumped out to me. He was mainly playing early downs, and it's worth noting, Boye Mafe was in the blue injury tent early in this game with a knee issue, but he came back and he finished the game. And I thought he had the best game for the Seahawks on defense. He had 5 tackles. He had a tackle for a loss, but this is maybe the most notable thing. I had him down for 3 tackles that netted 0 yards or less. He had 2 stops at the line of scrimmage. So he built off that strong preseason and didn't get a lot of pass rushing opportunities because they were subbing him out, putting Darrell Taylor in. So I'm not going to put too much of a burden on him for the struggles they had rushing the passer because, quite frankly, he didn't get as many chances. But when he was in there playing run defense, the Rams could not get anything going. There were a couple times where I'm not going to say guessed right, but he was aggressive getting off the line of scrimmage and chased down runs on the backside. And so he's been really impressive. And I thought today, where most of the players on Seattle's defense at least made a couple of mistakes, I thought that Boye Mafe, and maybe I'll change my mind rewatching the film, but I thought he was the most consistently solid player in this football game. And considering he was playing through a knee injury as well, he was one of the more impressive players to me. I'd like to see him get more opportunities to rush the passer, but His knee issue might have played into that, or it might just be that's how they're planning to use him. They want him to be an early down defensive end outside linebacker, and then they can sub in Darrell Taylor and Derek Hall for him. They want to keep all these guys fresh. But I was really impressed by what I saw from him. He was one of the few guys that had a strong preseason that was really able to build off of it and play at a high level today, and he helped contribute to the fact that the Rams only averaged 2.3 yards per carry on the ground in this game. They had 40 carries because they ran 32 more plays than the Seahawks, and late they were just trying to chew clock. But I thought Boye Mafe had a really good game, one of the few bright spots for a defense that couldn't get off the field and couldn't get out of their own way in this contest. And on special teams, this is really easy. Jaron Reed with one of the highlight plays early, getting his big mid up. He got all ball. He could have done the Dikembe Mutombo finger wag, and it would have been much deserved because he was able to get that mitten up there and block the field goal attempt. And unfortunately, this really was a sequence of plays that I think changed the way that this game played out. I don't know if the second half goes any differently, but the Seahawks had excellent starting field position after this blocked field goal by Jaron Reed. Mike Jackson picked it up and returned it inside the 50-yard line to the 42. The Seahawks didn't get any points out of it, though, because they went 3 and out, and then Jason Myers, his field goal attempt clanked off the right upright. That is a deflating turn of events when you get that huge special teams play, and then you get no points to show for it. It just felt like that really took the wind out of the sails for the Seahawks. And then a few bad things happened, like the injuries to your tackles, and it really slips away from you. But that was a really nice play by Jaron Reed, and it's unfortunate the Seahawks couldn't get any points off of that. And Mike Jackson's return there. There were a couple other decent special teams plays that are worth noting. DJ Dallas had a really nice punt return in this game. I thought he had a couple nice kick returns in the game too. So for those wondering why he's still doing that role for the Seahawks, he might not have the explosiveness to hit home runs and return kicks for touchdowns, but he does a good job, particularly on punts, of catching the ball. He's aggressive, doesn't let footballs bounce over him and then create really bad yardage situations for the Seahawks. So I thought that DJ Dallas did some nice things. And Michael Dixon, you don't want your punter to be one of the standouts necessarily, but the punts in the second half, he was booming the ball off his foot. So I think of the three phases, special teams was probably the best for the Seahawks, with Jaron Reed being the leader there with that really impressive blocked field goal in the second quarter that unfortunately did not lead to points. Coming up next, it's my first 3 up, 3 down of the 2023 season. It's going to be tough to figure out who the winners are coming out of this game. Certainly a lot of players that didn't live up to the hype and had a rough day that contributed to the defeat. I will get to that here in a moment on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get up to $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube on YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use and can be used on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the new NFL season in style with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. You're listening to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Coming up tomorrow, Rob Rang and I, unfortunately, we have to dig deeper into this game. Monday musings, our in-depth takeaways, offense, defense, special teams, rewatching the film, what went wrong as this game fell apart for the Seahawks in the final 2 quarters. We'll have plenty more to say on what went down at Lumen Field and why the Seahawks are 0-1 with maybe one of the uglier Week 1 losses that they've had in their history, let alone the Pete Carroll era. Let's get to our 3 up, 3 down, shall we? Even in defeat, there's always players that play well. And I just mentioned this player in the special teams segment, but I'm going to give him a little bit of a heads up here on our 3 up. DJ Dallas with that really nice punt return, and he had a couple runs in this game. He only had 4 yards on 2 carries, but one of them, it looked like he was going to get knocked down in the backfield, and he almost looked like a pass rusher. He did a shoulder dip move, and it led to the defender missing him in space. So he turned a no gain into a 5-yard gain. His second run, he got stopped in the backfield with poor blocking in front of him. But He had a really nice punt return that netted 18 yards, set up the Seahawks with really good field position. They got a field goal off of that. He had a nice kick return later in the game. So in a game where very few players made more than one or two positive contributions, I thought DJ Dallas did a lot of really exciting things for the Seahawks on special teams. And when he got his chance on offense, only touched the ball a couple of times. He had a nice first down reception as well. I thought he was one of the players that had a pretty solid game on offense for the Seahawks, considering how everything fell apart in those last two quarters. And then on the defensive side of the football, Jordan Brooks had 12 tackles in this football game, and the Rams averaged 2.3 yards per carry. One of the reasons that they had struggles with the run game most of the afternoon is the linebackers were getting downhill. Bobby Wagner had 19 tackles in this game. Now, there were a few missed opportunities for him in this game. I thought Jordan Brooks, at least from initial glance, had a better game overall. And there were a couple plays where he was able to run to the sideline, chase down ball carriers for minimal gains. This is 8.5 months after having surgery to repair a torn ACL. So just the fact he was out there was exciting, but I thought he played pretty well. I thought he was flying around the football field, didn't show any ill effects of his knee injury. And we'll look in the film and see how much the linebackers impacted the coverage stuff, but it felt like the secondary really was the biggest problem there, and that maybe the Seahawks just schematically were not ready for what the Rams are going to throw at them. Bobby Wagner was talking about the receivers being spread out more. This is certainly something they're going to have to look back at on film, but I think Jordan Brooks had a really solid first game back from that torn ACL. As far as my last player here on my 3-up, I'm going to put Uchenna Nwosu on here just because of his contributions disrupting the backfield. He had 2 tackles for loss in this game. He didn't have much of an impact as a pass rusher. There were a couple plays where he was able to get a little bit of pressure in the backfield. I had him down for one of the 2 pressures and Draymond Jones having the other one. He had a really quiet debut for the Seahawks as well, but Nwosu did have 2 tackles for loss. He was active around the line of scrimmage. The Rams had a hard time when they ran the ball at him. He and Bobby Wagner combined for 3 stops where they were working together that netted 0 yards or negative yards in the first half. So again, in a game where there were a lot of poor things on the defensive side of the football for the Seahawks, I thought Uchenna Nwosu, you want to see him impact the game more as a pass rusher, but his run defense was really solid up front for the Seahawks. Now going 3 down. I don't want to pick on these 2 players that much because they got put in a very difficult situation. When you have both your starting tackles go down with injuries in a matter of minutes, Abe Lucas was out immediately starting the second half. Jake Curhan subbed in for him. And then you see just a few seconds after the announcement that Lucas was questionable to return, Charles Cross gets wrapped up and injures his toe. He's limping off the field. Both those guys check out. Now all that onus is on Jake Curhan and Stone Forsythe to try to handle the Rams edge rushers and potentially Aaron Donald sliding outside like the Rams like to do with him. That puts a lot of burden on 2 guys that are backup caliber players. They're not starters for a reason, and they hadn't prepared this week as starters. That puts a lot of pressure on those guys. And I felt like Shane Waldron just kind of locked up most of the playbook because they couldn't protect Geno Smith. So unfortunately, that's going to be my first set of guys here on 3 down. The backup tackles, if the Seahawks have to go into the next game with one or both of their tackles out, it creates a major issue. And I think John Schneider, it's very early in the season. You're not going to be able to call around and make trades. But at some point, if one of those tackles is out for an extensive period of time, you're going to have to work the phones a little bit because I think the drop off from those starters to Jake Curhan and Stone Forsythe, that might be as big of a gap as you're going to find on this roster from the starters to the backups. No offense to those guys, but they really struggled in this football game. And as for my other 2 players on 3 down, I could say the pass rush in general, Draymond Jones had a pretty quiet game. Jared Reed defensively had more penalties than he did pressures in this game. Uchenna Nwosu wasn't able to get after the quarterback despite playing well against the run. Boy, Mafe didn't get a lot of opportunities. You could put the pass rushers on there, but I think this game is more about the secondary. Trey Brown getting to start at left corner. There's a couple plays that jump out to me. He gave up a 44-yard reception to Tutu Atwell in the second half that led to a touchdown by Kyron Williams into the end zone, a 7-yarder. And then he also had a missed tackle on the opening drive. He could have got Puka Nacua down about 10 yards away from the goal line and ended up helping him back up with his tackling efforts. And Nacua got down to the 1-yard line. Next play, Williams punches it in, and the Rams take the lead. So it was a really rough game for him. You add in the hand to the face mask penalty that negated a third down stop and led to more points for the Rams. This was a really difficult outing for him, and it seemed like Matthew Stafford was eager to pick on him. So not a good audition for him in this start at left cornerback. And Devin Witherspoon has a chance to be back next week. Maybe Devin Witherspoon's the one that ends up starting on the outside next week, or maybe it's Mike Jackson. But Trey Brown didn't do enough to necessarily make that a secure spot for him at the left cornerback spot in Seattle's starting lineup. And I thought Julian Love had a really rough debut. I was expecting much more from him. I looked into this game as one where both the safeties would have plenty of chances to make plays on the football, and they did, but they didn't make plays in the football. Quandre Diggs had a rough day too, allowing Van Jefferson to be wide open on a deep ball. And luckily, Van Jefferson didn't catch the pass. That would have been another explosive play. The Rams ended up scoring on that drive anyway. Atwell had his reception a few plays later, but Julian Love allowed a 31-yard reception to Tyler Higbee in coverage. Had a couple missed tackles. They were picking on him in the middle of the field too. I just thought it was a very underwhelming performance from him, particularly in coverage. They were expecting more out of him. He's going to have a chance to bounce back next week, but he didn't look comfortable necessarily, especially with what the Rams are doing. He was one of the players that felt like Matthew Stafford was really going after. Trey Brown and Julian Love, a lot of the targets were going their direction, and the Rams had great success doing so. So both those players are really going to have to elevate their games next week going against Jared Goff and a Lions offense that has a lot of weapons of their own on the outside, including Amon-Ra St. Brown. You better play better or the Lions are going to put up 40 plus on you. That offense has a lot more weapons than what the Rams do without a healthy Cooper Kupp, and you had a lot of issues. I felt like the secondary was the biggest problem in this football game for the Seahawks. They just couldn't prevent guys from getting open. There were a lot of explosive plays downfield. The middle of the field was wide open, maybe some of that being schematic. But Julian Love, Trey Brown certainly had really rough performances in this season opener for the Seahawks as they fall short 30-13 and drop to 0-1 on the season. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be rejoined by Rob Rang, my partner in crime. The two of us will dish out our Monday musings and take a closer look at this game that started well for the Seahawks and ended up falling apart on all three phases of the game. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.